So, after a long hiatus and several bouts of Lyme disease on both our parts, we are in recovery today, and Elan and I are going to launch ourselves on the next installment of our examination of the Gurdjieff music, the movements, and the meaning that's embedded in them. So, without further ado, since it's been so long, Elan, why don't you take it away and tell us a little bit about what you're interested in looking at today?
Okay, so to begin with, just to say that we've now done 7 podcasts, and then there was this hiatus. And what I'm thinking is that we should keep the momentum that we've built uh, in one respect, but we should also go back and fill in some of the gaps, some of the places which I really didn't talk about um, because all of these foundational aspects of music and what's going on with the movements, etc., will help us to understand what's going on in the music that I'm going to be playing for you and that I'm going to be talking about in terms of the movements and other things. So that's one thing that I'm going to try to do today. I want to talk a little bit about melody because it's it's relevant to the particular movement that I want to talk about. Now, I also want to bring up something about Thomas de Hartmann. We've hardly said anything about who Thomas de Hartmann actually was, and I believe that for many people there is a lack of information about who he was. And I'm just going to tell you this story that happened when I first got involved with the Thomas de Hartmann project. And when I was out in Seattle giving a concert in 2009, and I came across a CD of the Gurdjieff de Hartmann music. I'm not saying whose CD it was, but in this CD booklet, it said that it asserted that Thomas de Hartmann was a mediocre journeyman composer who rose to the occasion to compose the great music with Gurdjieff, the Gurdjieff to Hartmann music specifically, but we could also include the movement's music in there. And I feel like it would be very useful, maybe next time we have a meeting, to go into some detail about who de Hartmann was. But I just want to say the following before we start talking about these issues that are on the table for today. And that is that Thomas de Hartmann became famous throughout Russia in 1906 or 1907 when his ballet, The Scarlet Flower, La Fleurette Rouge, was performed in front of the Tsar with Nijinsky in the cast, Pavlova, Fokin. In other words, the world's greatest dancers were in this production, which went on for 7 straight seasons, 6 in St. Petersburg, and then the last in Moscow, and then the First World War came and intervened. So Hartmann, why I'm saying that is 2 reasons. Hartmann was a dance composer from his earliest years, among many other styles, but dance was very, very, very important for him. He then went in 1908. He went to Munich to work with Kandinsky, and there he worked not only with Kandinsky but with Sakharov, who was considered the first modern dancer, also a great dancer, and they worked together on this Der Gelbe Klang, the Yellow Sound, which was a production of way ahead of its time. So he's working with Sakharov on this multimedia production. And then after that, he went to Gurdjieff. And what did he do there? The Struggle of the Magicians. And there was dance in that. So, and then there's the movements. And there are something like 7 or 8 ballet scores that Hartmann wrote. So it's not like he was an amateur before he came to Gurdjieff. He was an extremely accomplished dance composer. And the reason I'm talking about the quality of the dancers is relevant to what I'm going to be talking about with the movements that we're going to be looking at, and some of the issues that have come up with the movements. But before we do that, let me just give you a very, very brief discussion about melody, and hopefully some of these facts will come to support what we're talking about in the music that we're looking at. The first thing to realize is that notes. Can you hear that, by the way?
Yeah, sounds great.
So notes, they either go up, or they go down, or they stay the same. Okay? And it's very important to recognize that, because going up has a meaning, going down has a meaning, and staying the same has a meaning. And I will demonstrate in one case how that works in this movement that we're going to talk about today. The other thing that we could say about, that I want to say about melody, is a huge subject, is that melody is based on scales. And we have many, many, many different kinds of scales. And I will play you a number of scales right now, just for your information. So here is a common scale. 7-tone scale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Repeats the octave, okay? And we have different kinds of 7-tone scales. We have also the ancient modes, and they have different intervals. So the scales are differentiated by the intervals between them, and that's another subject that we can get into in more detail at a certain point. But there are also scales that have different numbers of notes. And for example, we have a scale that sounds like this. That's called an octatonic scale, an 8-note scale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And composers at the turn of the century were using that scale, including Thomas de Hartmann and a lot of his music. And this is a scale that is based on 4 tritones, which turns into this. We also have a scale like this, the chromatic scale, which has all the notes all the colors of the instrument that we have at hand. Now, there's 2 other scales I want to bring to your attention just right now for the purposes of our work. We have this scale, and this is called a whole tone scale. I should say that in music we have do, re, mi. In between do and re, we have a semitone. Okay, so we have whole tones, do to re, and we have half steps or semitones, halfway to re, halfway to mi fa, as you know, in the science of the law of sevenfoldness, we have just a skip. There is no semitone, but between fa and sol, semitone, sol and la, semitone, la and si, semitone, and si and do, no semitone, because that's a 7/8 shock, right? There's shock between 7 and 8 and 3 and 4. So there's no possibility of just stepping from one tone to another. So the scales are made of different patterns of whole tones and semitones. Now, I don't know if that's clear. If it's not clear what I'm saying, then the next time I will have a whiteboard and I will show this on a whiteboard what I'm talking about. So if people are confused, please let us know. So now we have this one scale which I precipitated what I just said, called the whole tone scale, which is the scale that is used by the Impressionists like Debussy. And the thing about these different scales is that they have different qualities and they have different purposes. So The whole tone scale is completely, if you have a piece of music that's written in a whole tone scale, in whole tones, then you have this very dreamy impression. It's not really based on this world. It's sort of like, sort of, sort of in between this world and another dimension, actually. Mysterious,
Mm.
right? Whereas the scale that we use for that Gurdjieff talks about, seven tone scale, or the seven tone scale, is based on process, and that's how we can talk about different processes, the law of the octave, how processes work. Okay, and then there's one other scale which I want to bring to your attention, and that's the five tone scale. And that's represented, if you look at the piano, at the five black keys. Okay? And these are the tools by which the composers put their melodies together. Okay? I'll say one last thing about melody before I forget. And that is this. We have, in music, we have rhythm, which in general, we could say from a very sort of superficial way, rhythm is about the body. It's related to the moving center. We have melody, which is related to the thinking center. We follow the melody with our thoughts, right? And we have harmony, the chords, and they are related to the feelings. Now, if you were to tell a singer that when she's singing a melody that's all done with the head brain, she'd probably give you a little slap on the face and say, no, that's not true. I evoke feelings in the way I sing. And this is true because you can make these generalizations, but we have to remember that each one of these different distinct aspects of music affects all of the centers. For example, with rhythm, if you have with harmony, rather, if you have chords, you can make harmonic rhythm by having, like, two of these, two of these, two of these, and that becomes rhythmic. It's not just connected with your feelings, it's also connected with rhythm, and it works with all of the different aspects of music. It goes back and forth in the three centers. All right. I'll stop here before I start talking about the movement and just see if you have something you want to throw in there, Lee, at this
Um,
point.
well, I followed all of it. It's expanded my intellectual grasp of the way that the scales function. And I think that the illustrations were very helpful because, of course, a number of those scales are familiar to me and to probably to all of us because they're exploited in specific ways in, for example, the film industry. Specific scales are used to consistently evoke certain emotional states or attitudes, like the mysterious stuff, the otherworldly stuff. That's an exact description, the way you brought it, and it's frequently used in film pieces or in dance pieces where people want to evoke that otherworldliness. So I think that the argument that it's a language begins here where you're educating us.
Great, great. So I brought the subject of melody up because of what's happening with the movement that I want to talk about today. And I thought that since we had begun, we did not complete our discussion of the obligatories uh, over those seven conversations. But I thought that it would be useful to begin to look at the 39 series at this point, just to say we're going to begin freshly into another subject, and we begin with number one. Now, number one, if you do manage to get the the movie of this, a video of this dance that you can put onto this podcast, it will be helpful, but it's not absolutely essential. So I want to say something about number one, and then I want to play. Maybe I should play it for you to begin with. Okay, and with just this slight introduction. No, no introduction. Let's go into it.
Okay, let's go.
I can see it's going to go. The introduction is going to be very long. If I so here's the dance, and while I'm playing, I would like you to go back to what we talked about in some of our previous podcasts. Is that what this is, by the way? Conversation? In our previous conversations, and see if you can discern what the rhythm of this piece is. Okay? Remember, the rhythm, well, I'll leave it at that. And I have to use the metronome because, for a specific reason here.
Wow.
Okay, let's begin this discussion from where, just to continue from what I began with the scales, okay? Because the reason I brought up the scales for this particular discussion was that this piece is in a very unusual scale. It's in a pentatonic scale, 5-note scale. It's got it's using those notes. And in um, in popular, I would say, in the popular awareness of musical awareness among people who know something about, about these things, this particular scale is often associated with Chinese music or Japanese music or Asian music. Let's put it this way: Far Eastern music. It uses this scale. Whether it's actually true or not, I think there's probably some truth to it. I don't think it's the whole thing, obviously.
Mm.
But this is a pentatonic scale. It has it has a Far Eastern kind of sound to it. And I happen to notice that in this piece, in these bass chords, where he goes, oh no, yes, he writes tam tam. Now, a tam tam, again, is a huge instrument in the orchestra, which it's the big round thing that you strike, and it makes this huge sound, also connected with Far Eastern music. So he's obviously composing this with the idea of something that's foreign to Western ears. Okay? Now, let's talk about number one from a series from a number of different points of view. So, what I understand, having worked at this movement many years ago, from what I understand about this movement, it is as if the dancer is being suspended by a string, and holding the string is a puppet master. Okay, a, a big puppet master up in the sky someplace, and he's just jerking the string. And when he jerks your string, you move. So the underlying psychological idea is that in life we are jerked around by hazard, by chance. And our work in this particular path that we're on is to maintain our presence and maintain ourselves inwardly while we are being jerked around by life. Okay? This is why the fourth way is considered to be a path that does not take place necessarily in isolation. It's something that takes place in life. And it's, to me, it's no accident that Gurdjieff makes this number one. That number one, we are being pulled around. Can we maintain our presence, our integrity during this thing? And what happens in this movement, I don't know if you noticed, but it accelerates. Okay, so was that clear when I played it or not?
Yeah. Yeah, I think
Okay.
so.
Okay, so in other words, it gets worse. Okay, it gets worse. Now,
Everything always gets worse.
now I will also, and I haven't gotten into the subject of rhythm yet, but which I will bring up in a moment. But I want to just bring up another issue, which I consider to be very, very important if we're going to be looking at the movements and meaning and the history, because, and I've been thinking about this quite a bit over the years, and even more intensely lately. We have this strange situation where um, where de Hartmann, and that's why I wanted to point out that de Hartmann was a legitimate and he was a very, very experienced composer of dance music. Hartmann composed with Gurdjieff between 1918 and 1924 all those early dances, and and when it comes to tempo, okay, when it comes to tempo, how fast to do these movements, his indications were words, verbal. So andante, walking, allegretto, a little quick, lento. Those are the kinds of descriptives that he used. And of course, those words have a range of tempo, of speed. But when it came to the 39 series, which was composed after Gurdjieff died, Gurdjieff sent his members of his first row of dancers to show Hartmann the gestures, the dances, so that Hartmann would compose this music for because Gurdjieff wanted Hartmann to compose the music. Most of it had been improvised before that. Who hadn't Very little of it had been written down, and these dancers, his best dancers, went and showed Hartmann the dances, and Hartmann then composed the music. And for each of these dances, Hartmann has two descriptives of tempo. One of the descriptives is slightly mysterious. He says, like, a quarter note equals 7, or quarter note equals 3, or a half note equals 9. And I never understood what that meant until finally I had a chat with Tom Daly, who owns the Thomas de Hartmann estate, recently, and he explained to me what that meant. And what that means is this: in order to discover the tempo of the piece that he was writing for, Hartmann would go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and that became the tempo. Or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, a slower tempo. So that was that. But he also wrote a metronome marking for these dances. Now, the thing about a metronome marking, it's exact. It tells you exactly how fast these things should go. Well, there's a lot of issues that have accrued because of this situation. Even from the very beginning, if you listen, I was privileged to hear the recording of the 1951 movements demonstration, and already there were big deviations from what Hartmann had composed. So I just want to put this out there that the transmission of the movements since Gurdjieff's time has been an oral tradition of one teacher to another, to another, to another. And they have tried to keep as faithful as possible to that line of teaching. But inevitably, there are going to be changes because it's an oral transmission. The thing that stayed the same during this entire time has been the sheet music. What's written on the sheet music? So I consider that it's very important to question what's in the music, what's on that, what is it that that sheet music says, and is it possible that the sheet music has things to teach us, okay, about the movement? So here we go. This movement, the way I played it, is extremely quick. So I'm going to put on this metronome again. Dut, 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 dut. That's the slowest speed. When I learned the movement, we never even got in the highest speed. We never even got to that speed. We got, and when I just played it, I was aiming for 150. Which
Mm-hmm.
is very, very fast. So,
Yeah.
so what is that? What is that telling us? What does it tell us when we see that this speed is so fast that we can hardly do it?
Mm-hmm.
And what are we to make of that fact? So, no teacher is going to teach a class of beginners or intermediate people how to do this. Could it be that what Hartmann is writing and what he saw was for a level of dancing, the ideal level of the dance, right? That's what the aim is. And it's not that the music is too fast, it's that it's it's intrinsically too fast. It's too fast for us. So what to do about that situation? Because how to deal with that situation? Would it be of use to a class to actually hear this music at the speed that it was written for, so that there is an aim, a direction, even though they can't do it, that they can move towards those speeds? Okay?
Mm-hmm.
I'm just asking.
Well, it's a great question. I think that the argument that the sheet music has a definite meaning and establishes a standard is, in in my estimation, unassailable. Uh, Gurdjieff, unlike modern day Gurdjieffians, did not necessarily recruit amateurs to his cause. Hartmann was no amateur. He was a professional musician and I think a genius in many ways. So that I was kind of shocked to hear about those CD liner notes. They don't square with what I've heard him compose in the least. He was a great composer, not some mediocre piano player. But I think that there was intention behind Gurdjieff's work with him. And I think that the intention extended to the way that the music was annotated, as you're describing. So it's a totally legitimate question that needs to be examined. And I think the idea of aspiration entering into the picture here, as you put it here at the end, is exactly right because we're all hopeless in a certain sense. We're all hopeless idiots, but hope always has to have a longer reach than our arms, in a sense. And the music itself has that principle built into it, from what you're saying.
Right. I mean, for many years, for 40 years, I was a piano teacher. And I was teaching children. And I would teach. Sometimes I would have a 9-year-old who was playing a Beethoven piano sonata because they were talented, but they didn't play the Beethoven piano sonata up to tempo, but they heard the music up to tempo,
Hmm.
right? And by hearing the music up to tempo, they actually were able to get the wholeness, the impression of the wholeness of those pieces. So I think that we have a dyad here, and I'm saying it's a dyad because I've heard movements teachers saying, "No, it's too fast," and the pianist saying, "No, this is what it says on the music." So there's a dyad right there. But what could be the reconciliation is to look at it in a different kind of a way and to present this music and to present the dance as much as possible how it should be in the ideal for the student. And
Hmm.
then to go back and have the student learn the gestures, and go through this thing carefully and learn it to the best of their ability. But to always have this the ideal in front of you. And I've spent quite a amount of time looking at the question of what the difference would be in certain movements if we were to follow the tempo that Hartmann wrote. And I don't want to get ahead of myself,
Hmm.
but that's an issue that I do want to look at because there are some very strange answers that I've come up with on that. But let's take a look at number one and look at some of the things that Thomas de Hartmann has put into this music, which may be not generally noticed. Okay? So the first thing is we have tempo, and as I said, the tempo begins, and again I'm going to begin it like this. Now you will notice that so so rhythmically speaking, it's in 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, 3, 2, 1, because the dance is going up the row and then back down the row, and then it's in 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, okay, and it's in 5, which is divided into 3 plus 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If you remember when we did the rhythm things in our previous conversation, you'll understand what I'm talking about here. And then it goes into 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, which is really not 6 in the traditional way. The way he's divided is really 3, 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay?
I noticed that. Yeah.
Okay? And he's because he's not writing in 6 the way a 6-beat rhythm ordinarily goes, which would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. He's going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. He has to write dotted lines down to show that he really means 2 plus 2 plus 2. And he does. Now, here's the interesting thing. From what I said before, this is somebody on a string. This is me on a string being jerked around by life, and it begins staccato. So we can hear quite clearly what the beat is. But then for the fives, he slaps down the pedal and he makes it louder. So all of a sudden, it's more intense because it's now louder, it's more pressing upon you, and he's blurring the clarity of the rhythm, of the pulse. So instead of having, he could have done, and you would hear that very, very, very clearly. But that's not what he does. He does. Right? So he's slapping down the pedal In my understanding of Hartman's the way Hartman thinks, he's saying I'm going that now I'm going to create more difficulty for the dancer because it's not going to be as clear as where the beat is. You're going to have to depend upon where you began in the first part. And the third section, six in the six, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, then he makes it fortissimo, very loud, and the whole section is pedaled through. So it's like this. Oops. Okay. And then he goes into the next section, and the next section begins softly again, then medium loud, then very loud, but it's at a faster speed, okay? And the whole movement, as you heard, the whole dance ends with a very loud crash, right? Now, I just want to say one more thing about what Hartman is putting into this dance to go along with the psychological um, teaching that's behind it, that we are people, that we are working in life to be present in spite of the obstacles that we come up against on a daily or momentary basis. And that's this. Remember, I was talking about melody and saying that notes go up or they go down. Now, when I was learning this piece in a serious way, I happened to notice something very strange. As soon as you begin, if you listen to what's going on in the left hand, he's going, and if I take it apart further, it's, so the direction of those notes is down. As soon as he changes the speed in the next section, he changes the direction, the melodic direction in the left hand. All of a sudden it's, and he's doing that because changing that direction to forward, going up, gives a natural impulse of acceleration without even changing the metronome marking, which he, by the way, does. So he's just using that little bit of extra impetus to accelerate this music. And to me, that when I discovered this, and I noticed that in the future, in the other accelerations that he does, he never goes back to a backwards pointing direction. So it must have been, it's clearly intentional what he wrote, and it's an indication of how subtly Hartman writes for these movements. He's being very, very, very clear about what he wants to say. And I think that's all I want to put in on number one for today, unless you want to add something.
Um, no, I think it's been excellent. As always, it's very feeding. I've learned a lot. And it's fascinating because it does give us all insights into the process that are in a certain sense they're microcosmic because it's technical stuff about the music, but they're huge actually because it shows us how deeply these movements were thought about. They couldn't really be themselves without the music, if you know what I mean. And the music has a clarity in it that is much more calculated than what I would have expected just doing the movements. So I think it's as always been wonderful. I think that the community is going to be fascinated. And I'm going to see what I can do to get a video of that movement. I'll be working on that during the coming week. So I'd love to publish this weekend. I'm going to stay my hand for a few days while I see what can be done about getting a video to go along with it because I'd love to see the movement now, having heard the music.
Right. Well, it's funny because I was thinking about the movement this morning before we had our meeting, and one of the things about this particular movement is all the gestures are asymmetrical.
Hmm.
It brought me back to doing the movement of how uncomfortable the gestures are in this movement, um, and not in the usual kind of movements way. But I mean, there's always this sort of thinking outside of the box, outside the box. Um, uh, you're having to use your attention in order to hold these many different things in your mind. That's one thing, but the actual gestures of are so asymmetrical. It's almost like everything is off kilter in this in the gestures of this movement. Anyway, it
Hmm.
was just a thought. I don't know what the relevance to it is, but I suggest that you might want to look at that when you watch the when you have
Well,
a chance to watch the movement.
I'm a big believer in percolation, which is to say you take something in as unopinionated as possible and let it sit there for a few days, because the best thinking is always done when one is doing absolutely nothing.
That's
So,
right. That's
so,
right.
and that's exactly how musicians have to think, because the minute you start thinking about anything in music, you're doomed. You have to almost be empty and let the music play itself. But anyway, on that note, we're going to try and reconvene next Friday to go even further still. If you're available, I should be. And now that I'm over Lyme disease, I'm much less likely to keep forgetting our appointments.
Great, great.
All
Okay,
right.
and I hope the audience has noticed we have a new format so that you should be able to see and hear more clearly.
Yeah, I believe it's going to be much improved, and we'll verify that shortly. All
Okay,
right, Elan. Great seeing you.
you too.
Take care.